The data coming out of South Africa, and I say this carefully, but seems to be pointing towards Omicron being much more transmissible, but much more mild and not resulting in many deaths. So, are we being heavy handed in our fear about all of this?
It's extremely transmissible. We're seeing doubling times of less than 2 days here, which is incredibly fast, which means it's extremely infectious, even if it is a bit milder. And Chris Whitty yesterday was extremely reluctant to give any weight to that. I'll talk perhaps a bit about why I think it might not be milder in a minute. Even if it is a bit milder, the fact that we'll have so many cases means that we will have a lot of serious cases because it's transmitting so quickly. The NHS is already on its knees. If you want people with cancer to get treated, if you want people with heart attacks and strokes to get treated, we cannot afford to overwhelm the NHS with COVID cases, and that's what's going to happen unless we take drastic action quickly.
And I accept that hospitalisations might go up. That's what happened in South Africa.
They will go up. It's not might. They definitely will go up. It's a case of how far they'll go up.
However, that's an argument as to why the NHS hasn't been prepared over the last 21 months for a scenario where they might need to treat more people.
The NHS has been grossly underfunded for a decade or more. So, of course, it's not prepared. It was already struggling before the pandemic came along.
But South Africa saw hospitalisations go up. I'll repeat it, though. But there were no deaths from Omicron. Even the area now where they are in Gauteng, where they believe that Omicron was first discovered and originated, which is 6 weeks on, they've seen hospitalisations go up, but they now have more people with milder illness in hospital than more severe illness. They've not seen any deaths, and their population is only vaccinated to the tune of 26%. And so a lot of people will look at that and think, well, why would it be any different here?
They've had a very high rate of natural infection in Gauteng province. So many people will have immunity from having been infected. We do know that you're more likely to be more likely to get reinfected with this variant than with other variants, but it does look like you have enough immunity to prevent serious illness if you have prior immunity. That's probably a very large part of the reason why they're seeing lower hospitalization rates than with previous variants. It's not because the variant is less infectious, it's because more people have the T-cell immunity you get from prior infection.
Then why aren't we allowed to use our T-cell, our natural immunity, instead of a vaccine passport here? I thought that was dismissed as an idea of proof that you are protected from COVID because natural immunity just couldn't be relied on enough.
The passports, the COVID passes, they're not about whether you're going to be ill enough to go into hospital yourself. They're about how likely you are to transmit it. We know that the prior infection and vaccination to some extent will have a...
Oh, I think we've just lost Dr. Peter for just a moment. I mean, what do you make of what you've heard from him so far?
Well, I mean, it's difficult to say because obviously he's far more qualified on this subject than I am. But it strikes me that all of the information that we're seeing reported today in the press, as you say, coming out of South Africa, Omicron doesn't seem to be such a great threat, and particularly in the United Kingdom, where we have a population that is so vaccinated and so many months ago had such a high level of natural immunity from prior infection. It just seems that a lot of this talk, as you mentioned already, never mind the silliness of putting up barriers around a Christmas tree, but now this talk of having this firebreak lockdown, that all of that just seems over the top.
Well, let's go back to Dr. Peter English. Sorry about those technical glitches, Doctor. But we're now at a situation where we have a cumulative total here in the UK, and these are the figures that came out last night at 6 o'clock, so they're the latest ones, of knocking on 15,000 confirmed Omicron cases, 14,909 across England, Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales, of which 13,741 are here in England. And out of those, 65 are in hospital with Omicron. Again, and we have had one death, which looks like it's someone that was in their 70s who was unvaccinated. Many people will look at the number of knocking on 14,000, resulting in 65 hospitalisations, and again will be quite confused as to how those numbers can relate to us needing to take such heavy-handed measures.
Because the numbers are doubling more quickly than every 2 days, which means we're going to have extremely large numbers very soon. And even if only a relatively small proportion of them need to go into hospital, that will end up being large numbers of people. We already have an NHS which is at breaking point. We have operations being delayed. We have ambulances stacking up, unable to pass patients into the hospital. We cannot afford any further increase on strain on the NHS. Doctors and nurses are at their knees, having worked longer shifts, extra shifts. They need a break. They're not going to get it. There won't be enough of them to go around. People are going to die from heart attacks and strokes and injuries from car accidents, that all the sorts of things that people normally get that would normally be treated successfully, they're not going to be.
But you know that the hospitalisations for COVID
it doesn't matter if they're lower. The fact that they still exist, there's still enough.
No, but not even of Omicron. They're nowhere near where they were at our peak. If anything, they've been going down. Total hospitalisations.
It would be reckless in the extreme to assume that they won't go up a lot. They might not go up as much as they did with previous variants. They're still going to go up a lot, and it's extremely reckless to suggest that it's minor, doesn't matter, unimportant. It's not going to affect the NHS. It is. The NHS is already seeing many more cases going in. I'm sorry, but it's completely irresponsible to suggest that this is minor.
I've not suggested that it's minor and nothing to worry about at all, and I have acknowledged.
You have been saying that there's no point in doing anything about it because it's not important enough to be worth having further measures taken.
No, I've said, if you're talking about before this interview, I've said absolutely that I believe that a lockdown and the thought of going back into that is absolutely not proportionate at all. But while you and I have been discussing this, I have acknowledged, and in fact when I've been talking to Emma quite often, I've acknowledged that it would be likely that hospitalisations would go up. What we're doing is questioning whether, firstly, the modelling and the data is completely accurate. Secondly, I am respectfully holding your position to account regarding where hospitalisations were from a year ago, which I think are two very reasonable things to question people on, question you on, after 21 months of restrictions on people's lives.
It may be 21 months of restrictions, but we now have a much, much more frightening variant on us. It's more frightening because it is so much more infectious.
But is there any chance that the way in which people have been modelling for how severe it will be when it comes to actual translation into serious illness and deaths, is there any chance that modelling has perhaps been a little bit pessimistic or heavy-handed?
The modelling is worst-case scenario modelling. It says that in the models. This is what will happen if these things apply and if we don't do anything. We know how infectious the variant is. There isn't good evidence that it's milder. There is evidence that people have some protection from prior immunity and vaccination, which makes it less likely, but not eliminating the likelihood, less likely that they will be hospitalized. But the big concern is that it's not as effective as it was against previous variants, against hospitalization. There will still be many, many cases and many, many hospitalizations. The hospitalizations come 10 days to 2 weeks after the infection. The deaths come 3 to 4 weeks after the infection. So we are looking at the hospitalizations happening in January and March, the deaths in January and February rather. We need to act now to avoid people dying from things like heart attacks and strokes that could be treated and not getting their cancer operations in January and February.
All right.
Because the numbers we've allowed the numbers to get out of control.
Dr. Peter English, retired consultant in communicable disease control. Thanks for taking the time to talk to us this morning.